Welcome to the Master Sharpening Stone, a place for healers in diverse paths and abilities to sharpen and polish their skills. The path to mastery is never ending because mastery is not a fixed destination. All right, brother, good to see you. Welcome, Dr. Anthony Fleg, to podcast number 2 on the Master Sharpening Stone. How are you today?
I'm good, brother. Good to see you, Chilan.
So I'd like to, well, first of all, I'll drop your resume on the website so everybody can see, all the fancy details about you. But just you and me, we'll talk about like some of the highlights, So first question, I just want to start with like where it all comes from. You were raised with 2 parents who were doctors, and how do you think that influenced you in becoming the physician that you are today?
Hit me with the hard one from the start. First of all, welcome to everyone. Welcome in the sense of just joining my brother in supporting this kind of media. And I would say, growing up as a son with 2 physician parents, my mom was kind of in that first wave of women barging into the med school that was the good old white boys club. I was actually born while she was a med student, so I had it in me. But in a way,
you were in med school since birth.
Yeah, a bunch of people joked I should like ace it because I've seen it already one time from the inside. Sounds like a poem right there. But anyway, yeah, in some ways you question whether you're pursuing something just because of that kind of natural instinct to pursue what your parents did and who they are. And so in a way, it left me a little bit in those kind of college years and beyond college, where I actually went to teach elementary school in Baltimore City, my hometown. I wasn't really ready to commit to medicine, and I sure didn't know if it was my dream or if it was me as the oldest of 4 boys trying just to make parents happy.
Do you feel like there was a lot of pressure there to be that?
Good in that way. I wouldn't say any pressure. As people that had a lot of education and had to be pretty motivated, definitely like at any point where they thought I was stalling, they kind of wouldn't take I'm still figuring out what to do with my life. That just didn't quite work for my dad specifically. But pressure to be a physician, not at all. If I had liked school teaching, they were kind of just bugging me. Look, you're either deciding to go to med school or you should be talking about a master's in education. Otherwise, you're not taking this serious.
Make up your mind already.
Make up your mind, exactly.
So being that I know you for a while, and you're not the average thinking in a box type of scientist, and so I wanted to know, like, what is your guiding philosophy, and how do you harmonize your own worldview and that philosophy and your own faith with your role as a physician that still has to operate within that box?
Guiding philosophy, brother. Creator gives us medicine each and every day. Good medicine, some powerful medicine maybe that tempts us to go in not as positive directions, but that everything is medicinal, that everything created by that divine spark is holy, is beautiful, and really looking for the beauty in the crevices and the cracks, in the places where people mistake it for eyesores and call it, criminal activity that the graffiti artist is doing, and etc. And so I guess I see in every person that comes into me wounded in different ways, and in some ways willing with people like you and I to share their wounds in a very different way than they would with their loved ones, their family, their children. Like, it's such a beautiful place to take that kind of worldview of everyone is whole and holy and not broken and diseased and addicted, and really try to breathe some empowerment, some healing, some self-affirmation into that person's life. I had a patient today, you know, you can't be around healers without us telling stories about our patients. That's just us. So this patient basically works in healthcare, and she goes on and starts talking about how she doesn't have time to make time for physical therapy. I try to recommend, you know, acupuncture, herbs. I talked more today about herbs and PT and different oils for, you know, let's see, I was talking about castor oil and tea tree oil for someone's cyst that they had that the dermatologist wanted to cut on. Anyway, in this woman's case, I kind of called her out in a loving way. I said, look, are you waiting for the healthcare system? Oh, and her excuse was, well, we're always understaffed. So how can I get a way to essentially put my health on the radar when she goes to work each day in a health system to try to create health for other people? I said, you know, do you think your job's ever going to give you that moment where they say, we now, as your employer, put your health as number one to us? No, they're never. Are you think they're ever going to be well staffed? So you're basically telling me you're willing to wait an eternity that's never going to come to make yourself important enough to take care of in the same way that you take care of all the patients each day. And just let her sit with that. Just let her sit with it. And so just the ability to empower people who don't see their beauty, who have been told, particularly our indigenous and our brothers and sisters of color, that have been told that they are not whole, they are not American, they are not as smart, et cetera, et cetera. And for me to do my humble best at allowing them to see that.
It sounds to me like your approach is very public health, like global scale type of approach. Like, you're seeing things, well, not only on a very personal level, meeting that person one-to-one, but also you have an idea that's bigger, a more communal idea. You want to elaborate on that at all? Like, and actually, after this question, I want to segue into NHI. So if you want to kind of take it that way.
You know, it's a false notion of Western thinking that we exist as some individual being, as if it's like a bubble, and that individual exists without the existence of the others in their life, the plants, the four-leggeds, the birds that sing to them, even if they don't recognize that they're singing to them right outside that person's bedroom window. So I just think, from being around, you know, indigenous healers and people that value that, I don't even know how to kind of falsely not think of a bigger picture ecology view. I think even more than like public health, it's what's this person's ecosystem. I can't pluck, you know, a sage plant and understand it without understanding who its brothers and sisters growing right around it were. What were the deer saying when they came over and sniffed at you? What did the rattlesnake, you know, smell like or do to use you for shade, et cetera, et cetera. So people are an ecosystem, and it's challenging in even for our traditional healers and folks like yourself, I'm sure, because we're really doing medicine often out of the context of that ecosystem. And so we have to remind ourselves and do our best to to care enough to draw a picture of that ecosystem before we can ever try to heal that person. To do otherwise, I don't think works.
Yeah. So here's the plug right here. Native Health Initiative, tell us about that NHI. How did you get involved in that work? How did that come to be? I definitely want to link NHI website from this video as well, down there at the bottom somewhere.
Nice. I guess it came from a pretty humble place of me being a med student in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, not really knowing much at all about the tribes of our state, realizing that my medical education didn't care about the tribes in our state, and ignored them really completely. You know, the graph was, here's the white rate of disease, here's the black rate of disease, maybe if it was a more nuanced professor in the early 2000s, a Hispanic rate of disease. But here we were, state of North Carolina, largest native population east of the Mississippi, and natives were absent. And so I just wanted to find a way to get around some of the historical barriers to making a place for healers, and particularly like Western trained healers, to just begin to understand what Native culture and Native health and Native wellness looked like, and understand enough that they could advocate for Native patients and advocate for Native communities, that they wouldn't stay silent when, you know, people make comments like we'd hear in North Carolina. Oh, there are no natives around here. And I mean, there's literally that comment being made from a board of education to one of our NHI volunteers, like 2 miles away from a thriving native tribe that was, you know, state recognized. So the other interesting thing was there was a bunch of nobodies with no titles who came together in a small rural tribal community. And I always have kind of kept, and we, NHI, 15 years later, have kept this idea that it's amazing what gets done when no one cares who gets the credit. You didn't have a tribal, you know, chairperson in the room. You didn't have a university professor that was just there to make sure they were going to get some fame out of this. It was a bunch of you know, not even really, I don't think there was a physician in the room. There was some, I was a med student, and we put our minds together. We came out of that room with like a really, in hindsight, bold idea that 4 months later, that was January 2005, 4 months later, we would host a full-fledged summer internships with students from around the country and around the world coming to work with the tribes, serving as kind of hosts and host families, but also deciding what they felt were the health issues that they wanted to really have these students work on. And so underlying that was just the indigenous value system and currency of love, because any other system where you're having that conversation, someone would have, you know, said, wait, time out. We gotta spend 3 or 4 years raising money, because there just would have been a clear way of thinking that the only way to make this happen is through a huge grant. And so the idea of love as our foundation, love as our strategy for social change has really grown from that very kind of small beginning, but it was there even though we weren't, you know, using the word love. We weren't out of the closet, so to speak, just yet. But love as a way to really fund and ground our activism in who we are and what we believe in, as opposed to, oh man, I'm doing this because I'm about to overthrow the IHS, or I'm about to overthrow such and such political party, or, you know, no, it's really important to bring that energy and that medicine of what we do believe in, as opposed to being gobbled up by the same fear and negativity that we claim to be pushing against, even in our language, which, you know, war-based language is really so hard to, you'll never hear me say I'm fighting anything. I'm not fighting anything, you know. I'm addressing, I'm absolutely willing to be as passionate as you, but I'm not gonna be consumed by war in any of its levels to do the work.
Love is that philosopher's stone. It's like making that stone soup, that thing that can be manifested into anything else that's necessary. And those internships are still ongoing, right?
Yeah, year 16, and you know, a lot more going on. But one interesting thing, Shalon, I don't think you know, because Shalon here was a leader. We call them coordinators, but just beautiful people that bring their own path and their own skills. In the beginning, we actually sold ourselves as a global health project, and we simply wanted to tell the global health community, which I hate to be just really blunt, but to me, global health is a white person standing with a group of African children, you know, in a picture. And we wanted to show that global health included the US. In those first years, we had probably half of our interns come from overseas, and their view of the US was everyone lives great, everyone's treated well, everyone, you know, mansion kind of lifestyle. And just to show what tribes and indigenous communities look like and what their reality looks like, you know, for both students in the US and students beyond, was really one of our kind of social missions. Also, just to say that, you know, it's sexy to go fly away to another continent and work with poor brown and black children and communities and take your picture, but why don't you stay right in your backyard and address, you know, the glaring injustices in your own literally square mile that you live in, or your tribes within your community that you don't even know the names of, etc. So we won this big global health award that the only reason we applied was we just had fun with the idea that the committee would have to grapple with what does it mean to be a global health project that's working with American Indians from within the US borders, run by tribes themselves, not by a university or some, you know, kind of indigenous tourism kind of model where students pay $3,000 to go spend a week in a native community kind of thing, and we call it academic.
Yeah. Yeah, my main takeaway from all those internships, my experience around those, is that there was some really invaluable education going on there outside of the classroom, that especially, you know, for the med students that were involved in that, and the other, you know, other healthcare related professions involved in that process, that there was some lights that I saw get turned on about, you know,
Yeah.
shed light on the world out there and see what things are really like, you know,
Right.
beyond
Yeah.
the classroom.
The med student who gets off the plane and says, you know, I got my stethoscope, I'm ready to go. Where's the clinic? And we're like, you know, hold tight for a sec. Put that stethoscope down. You're
Going to the park.
actually has identified loss of language and culture in their youth as the health issue they want to address. So what you're really going to do is you're just going to sit and be quiet and learn in this basically indigenous cultural camp, and you might provide, you know, an hour or two here and there of like some health education, but you're not going to be doing what med school has told you a role of a doctor. And ultimately they think they're here to do service, but the real one really receiving the most education in that whole context is the student who's just in a very different realm and world. And to be able to create that, you know, has been a pretty neat thing to watch.
Yeah. So I also heard that there was someone you met out there that kind of had some influence in you ending up in New Mexico. What was that all about?
You mean that hitchhiker? I think I was a hitchhiker. Yeah, so I escaped after, you know, honestly, there weren't a whole lot of opportunities that I could find of really being able, as a non-native person, to go and learn with and from native communities. So finally, one person, after a couple years of trying, answered an email from the Navajo Nation and said, come out to Tuba City, you can be a free labor for our health education program. And another funny story, I don't think you know, Chilan, but my wife, who worked down the hall, the reason we really got to know each other that summer is in the middle of the night, this group of white Iowa college students had like such an incredible moment of culture shock that they had signed up to be camp counselors for this camp for the entire summer. In the middle of the night, they're gone. no goodbye note, nothing. Just leave my wife Shannon's program with like, what? We spent like months, figuring out this whole plan, and they just got up and left. So I got pulled off the bench, so to speak, and the rest is history. And yeah, I was living like the Paulo Coelho alchemist, living in the desert. I was, East Coast kid, had never spent time away from the Atlantic Ocean, mid-Atlantic, just no sense before that summer really of Native people as living, thriving. They were in the history books, and unfortunately for many people, that's still where Indigenous kind of living is. It was the pre-1492 years, so to speak. So we did migrate to the Southwest, and very much 12 years into it, enjoying our time here, and just the mixture. I don't really see myself ever moving too far from the desert landscape.
You found your treasure.
Yeah, found the oasis.
Mm. So I'd like to ask a little bit more about running medicine. How did that, as a more recent manifestation of the work that you're doing, how did that come about? And go ahead and feel free to brag about some of the accomplishments that you've had with that program.
18 medals, 14 President's Awards, 16 now.
How many miles?
That's right. How many miles? I want to start somewhere very different, brother. I just had this kind of thought recently, which to me was kind of profound. And that is, when I think of like the just beyond words power that movement has to heal. And I'm not at the end of the day a running activist. I'm a movement activist, along with being a love activist. I think of like how almost all of our traditions, whether we're in the Kiva, in the Sweat Lodge, at the Sundance, in the Hogan, in the church, synagogue, mosque, we talk about in a Buddhist circle, we talk a lot about like, the power that I think everyone recognizes of breathing deep. And particularly in this COVID moment, like, a lot of our breath is probably about here, and we're not really using the other, 60% of our lung capacity. We're literally stuck energetically here. And then I think about, what happens when you and I say nothing about anything deep. Just, I say, Chilan, brother, let's go for, a strenuous hike or a 3-mile run. We are, without even having to think about it, we are breathing deeper than probably we ever could, sitting right here, taking the deepest, most abdominal, most yogic breaths that we could take. And just that to me is a very recent just connection of, so you don't even have to, putting out the corn pollen, the cornmeal before you run, and all the other ways of symbolizing that beautiful thing of moving on this earth, and the unique way that running is just a kind of uniquely human movement, particularly the way we do it. And one of my running colleagues says, we're the only beings that he knows that know how to run and pray simultaneously. I don't know if I believe that I could ever say that our animal relatives don't have the ability, but yeah, just the idea that naturally it forces us to breathe deep, and that has to be connected to the same thing that the yogis and the Buddhist monks and the worshipers of Islam and Christianity and the traditional religions in our indigenous communities know about the power of deep breath and its cleansing ability. So running medicine came out of just a lot of pieces in my life. People like you who honestly have, put just the medicinal in everything that you do. The idea of running as much more than what I grew up with is just a thing to burn calories and cardiovascular fitness, but prayerful, spiritual way to connect and ground mind, body, and spirit. And so we created that basically as the the center for a community that moves together on all energetic levels is curing stagnation, and doesn't matter the other details, the races, the awards, etc. Aren't really all that important. I try to actually not memorize anything that we've accomplished in any kind of podium type way. So I really couldn't. If you pushed me against the wall and asked me to tell you what we've won, I would just say we win every time an elder comes out and for the first time feels their body again. And we win every time a young person shows up unannounced with a missing and murdered Indigenous women sign at a huge race, using that as a platform. And I'm talking about even young men that in the last year have showed up just to show their support for that group of people, using running for a much bigger platform. Literally this past weekend, we had a young person lead an effort called Footsteps for Families. He wanted to use his own legs to raise money for families needing help with school supplies. And so his goal was to get us to do 1,000 miles, and he wanted to raise $10,000 in a 12-hour period, just a few hours ago. So a lot of good things.
Nice. Shifting to being sedentary and sitting for many hours a day. Recently, there's something going on out there where a lot of us have been sitting in front of Zoom meetings for large parts of the day. How has the current pandemic and the shift towards telemedicine shifted your thoughts on medicine in general?
I mean, I'm sure it's going to change medicine in some ways that I can predict and that I also can't predict in way beyond the pandemic itself. But I guess one thing I'm noticing is I am very fatigued toward the end of the day, talking to a phone. I'm not doing anything with picture. So just phone conversations lack some of the personal ability to feed off people's energy in a fun way. I would just say no one no-shows anymore, which I'm a slow doctor who really wants to listen, and I think that's my best trait as a doc, is not talking and just listening. And so I need those no-shows. So I'm feeling the extra like 4 or 5 patients and 4 or 5 extra notes to write a day, and just feeling like I just go in and I sit at a screen and I don't have like real human interaction just about with a whole lot of people. But I guess it's taken some of my out of the box thinking and made it even more out of the box, more herbal remedy, more things that I feel like are really accessible to people right now than, say, even modalities like acupuncture and physical therapy. If this person's already told me they're really not comfortable leaving their home, then okay, let's think of some herbal remedies. Let's work them through some breathing techniques or meditate with them. So yeah, it's not something I'd like to do for my whole career, that's for sure. I find I'm usually have like a little bit of a headache by the end of a day like today, where I saw about 20 patients and just feels like I'm a kind of worker bee in a clog, and also trying to play like social worker and just support for a lot of lonely, isolated, out of work, economically struggling folks. It's a real challenge to be able to meet that need.
Filling multiple roles, huh?
Yeah.
What would you say is the most common complaint not necessarily complaint, but the most common need that you're seeing at this moment?
Well, pre-pandemic, they said that in the US, a culture that's so proudly me, and ego-centered, that like almost 1 of 2 people, when asked, don't have a single person they feel comfortable confiding in. And so you take that and then you isolate people even further, and you put fear, and some of that is well-founded fear. I'd rather people have a little bit of fear than feel like, this this is a political hoax and go out and infect the world. But so I think the loneliness is, even though it's not said, no one says, Doc, I'm here to talk about loneliness today, isolation. That's what I'm hearing as the undertone in so many of these conversations, the chest pain that is from anxiety, but the anxiety is from lack of human interaction and just not getting a hug, literally, maybe from anyone in months, not having human touch in months. That, you know, it is what's not said, but I think it's loneliness and isolation as the presenting complaint, as we say.
Yeah. I was just having a conversation with Esme yesterday, and she said, why do we call it social distancing? It should be physical distancing, because you can still call somebody, but it's been a while since I haven't had that habit to just pick up the phone and call somebody, because we're social distancing, you know? But it, you know, you're not going to catch it over the phone. But there's this idea deep in the subconscious of the population, like, I have to be alone right now. Whereas there's ways to not be alone without necessarily being
Right.
physically close to
I
someone.
would say ever since we let 2x4-inch screens control our lives, we have been on a steep slope of social distancing where we think we live inside this thing. And so we ignore the cashier that's telling us genuinely, you know, to have a nice day. And we ignore our own families and our own children trying to show us beautiful things. And so we've been on that path, but it is interesting that we've picked that that term as if we were so socially, you know, cohesive before.
Yeah. I've been playing a lot with the idea of how some people, like, sheltered in place by themselves. You know, they live alone and they sheltered in place by themselves, and how their experience is so different from the person who sheltered in place with a family of 7, 8 people living in a small home, and the struggles that those two different perspectives are experiencing. And at the end of all this, how those two perspectives are going to converge. And, you know, one side is going to say, you know, I really value being out and interaction again. And the other side is going to be like, you know what, I really value some time alone now, you know, and how both of those are super healthy, important things that we should value more than we do.
Yeah, different ends of the spectrum. I know I can just speak for myself. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say this is the first year in many years that we have a thriving garden, and energetically, you know this, and you've told me this, that, you know, there is a consequence to pay for the work that you do as a very public person, but just not putting enough energy into the home. And I'm really starting to value those small little moments where the 2-year-old comes up and, you know, wants to sing a song to me or wants to show me a new flower that came out of one of the rose bushes, you know, and those things that in a more rushed life, I think, pass even people like me by who live for those things.
Yeah. Those things that nourish our souls. Speaking of things that nourish our souls, I know that you have some interest in music and poetry and hip hop. And I wanted to know, like, what role that plays for you as far as a counterbalance to the multiple hours a day seeing patients, or, you know, on Zoom, or organizing the other 10,000 events that I know you organize in a week.
You know, yeah, it's an interesting life. A couple weeks ago, I get pulled aside by this hip hop health colleague. I call all of my hip hop heads, the break dancers, the DJs, the graph writers, my hip hop health colleagues, or just my health colleagues, on no different level than a radiologist who's calling me about a patient, and this consult was, hey dude, you know, what thoughts do you have? I want to throw this outdoor kind of breakdancing jam. What should I be doing in terms of safety and public health, and how could we create a cipher that's socially distant, and you know, these really interesting spaces that med school definitely didn't tell me were going to happen. You know, hip hop is a way for me of understanding the voice of the voiceless. It's a worldview, it's a culture, it's something that I just feel, you know, really honored to be immersed in and a part of. And you know, I occasionally I'll spit a rhyme with a patient that I feel like this will help really get them over a sense of Western medicine is here to hurt me. But I also feel like bringing art into our community, particularly in this COVID moment, is just such an important way to, we need to be feeding the artists right now more than ever. We need to have healthy art communities, and hip hop as one medium that, you know, again, tells the story of the people who aren't on the you know, mainstream stations, and aren't necessarily from communities that get any sort of attention in the state houses and the government kind of systems and the corporate systems. So it's really just a grounding force, I feel like, for me to remind me, you know, where I'm truly rooted. And you know, that's, I know, been one of our big connections. We talk medicine, we talk healing, we talk traditional ways, and then we talk hip hop, and they all seem to be very much talking about kind of the same thing. The very first time I went to like one of my first break dancing kind of events that I went to, I just kind of stepped back and realized how this this kind of very intense gesturing and everything had some of like the same core things of the really strict rules that ceremonial ways have, in terms of, you know, yeah, you might be right in my face, but you know, no contact. You respect that really kind of sacred line of actually going into something that would be more physically violent, and the ways that dropping a prayer feather or walking the wrong way around the hogan, you know, in ceremony, wait, it was all okay until you did that. Stop the record. You know, and has to set it straight. So
yeah, I've been really appreciating lately, for the last 3 or 4 years, how our generation is at an age now where we're bringing that hip hop influence like into the forefront of everything, from medicine to the news. Like I was listening to NPR a while back, and I heard some hip hop beats like on NPR, and it was, you know, beats that I remember from my childhood. And, you know, that means somebody, you know, in NPR who's programming is like, yeah, I'm gonna throw this beat on. This will be fresh, you know? And so these little references to things like that. And, you know, some of the music we've been sharing recently too, you know, by other physicians, hip hop by other physicians, you know, that I've been really able to appreciate, because it really speaks to my experience. Just like when I was younger, and, you know, I would hear music about graffiti, and that spoke to my experience as well. Now I'm hearing raps about medical things and diagnosis and treatment of patients. And I'm like, yeah, well, that also, it speaks to my experience right now. You know, it's not this pretending like things are what they were in the 80s. It's really right here and now. And it reminds me of when we went to that De La show, that De La Soul show, and they asked, you know, anybody in their 20s, you know, just clap, and it's like 2 people, like, and they said anybody in their 30s clap, and that's when the whole crowd was like, yeah, you know. And that was us, you know. That was us, that time period.
And there was a pretty big 40s and even 50s, I think, as that kept going.
Yeah.
Chilan, I got to tell this real quick story. Downtown Albuquerque, in the demonstrations, very well-intentioned demonstrations to really call America to some sort of reckoning, and just out of our delusional way of telling the story of this land. Anyway, you know, in many places there was, you know, some element that I won't even just postulate who it was, but some element, you know, throws rocks, and much of our downtown that was already a struggling downtown Route 66 corridor is now just plywood covering the storefronts. This group of basically like street artists comes together. They put this thing together called Paint for Peace. They've beautified in some of the like most just dramatic art and COVID, you know, centered kind of themes. Now that same plywood that was like an eyesore and a reminder of a downtown that's struggling on many levels is now this beautiful art show that literally takes about 6 city blocks. They called it Paint for Peace. They brought a message of healing and hope and renewal that no politician, no philosopher, no PhD, MD, acupuncturist, whatever. I mean, it like almost hard to describe in words. They saw that plywood as a canvas for renewal, when everyone else saw it as a reminder of, you know, a shameful reminder of a struggling downtown. So
That's real grassroots right there.
yeah.
Flowers come up from the seeds. You have any shout outs you want to give before we wrap it up?
Oh man, I want to shout out my family, my wife, Shannon, for putting up with me, my 4 beautiful kids, my just extended family. I really don't think of family as having any delineation between any brothers and sisters that live on this earth, even if I don't agree with them in certain things. They're brothers and sisters. We come from one bloodline of a human race. And Chilan, I want to shout out you. And you know, when I give injections as a family physician, I have my patients hold the medicine in their hand, and I ask them to put some good energy toward this triamcinolone that's going into their knee. And you know, I learn from people like you. I learn and I listen. I really try to better myself and you know, my being by people like you and people like hip hop artists that, you know, are not my medical colleagues in a strict kind of stay with the MDs over there and learn from them type of sense. And so I'm just appreciative of really all of that wisdom that is poured into me, and very honored to be number 2 on the show.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate you and all the work that you do. Much love to you and your family, and can't wait till we get to kick it in person soon, okay? Thank you very much.
Let's kick it.
That was Dr. Fleg, Dr. Anthony Fleg, the Master Sharpening Stone. Click subscribe.
Hey, Chilang.